Good morning,
Hello.
Catherine.
Good morning.
Okay, so I guess we are live now. I'd like to start this session and I'd like to greet everybody good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And I'm pleased to welcome you all to this Innovate for Cities Conference parallel session on cities' experiences in delivering local climate action plans. I am Maria Adelaide Lidesea. I'm a technical advisor and a regional coordinator for Asia Pacific for UN Habitat's Cities and Climate Change Initiative, and I come from the regional office for Asia and the Pacific, which is in Fukuoka, Japan. I'll be your moderator for this session, and today it's going to be an exciting discussion for us. The presentation that we will have will try to explore practical elements of climate action in cities from planning processes, implementation tools, and then measuring effectiveness to see and see how the experiences can bring about inputs to the goals of Innovate for Cities. We are scheduled to have three speakers for this session. One is from a local government and two from universities. And I am expecting to have a good interaction with the audience, those who are with us in the Zoom, as well as those who are joining us in the main stage of the Innovate for Cities platform. I will be entertaining questions right after each presentation. So if you are not comfortable raising your hands in the Zoom and engaging with us, it's okay to put it in the chat and I'll be reading it and so that we can all interact. Anyways, let's start this discussion going. So first off, we would be hearing from a pre-recorded presentation, which is all about walking the talk and why cities adopt ambitious climate actions. This is a presentation prepared by Dr. Mary Alice Dad from the Wesleyan University. Mary Haddad is the John E. Andrews Professor for Government. She is the Director of Office for Faculty and Career Development and Professor of East Asian Environmental Studies at Wesleyan University. Their presentation will focus on answering the question, why do some cities adopt ambitious climate action plans, and why is it that others do not? Their study examines United States cities that have signed for the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy to identify factors that have led them to adopt ambitious or net zero climate action plans. It finds that two factors make most difference: whether the city has a paid employee and a dedicated environmental or energy management professional, or whether the city has a university within it. Other factors such as per capita income, state funding, size, partisans, etc., uh, seems like not creating a major significance in terms of the ambitious targets that cities are creating. The study combines statistical analysis of the signatory cities with a qualitative study for Middletown, and it tries to explain why city energy managers and universities can have such a positive effect on city climate action. Over to you, Evie Support, to present and share the recorded presentation.
My name is Mary Alice Haddad, and my colleague Sonia Berry. We're both from Wesleyan University, and we're here to talk about walking the talk, why cities adopt ambitious climate action plans. We are interested in this question because, like many of you, we know that cities are going to have to be the answer to climate change. They house most of the people in the world, they consume most of the energy, and they generate most of the CO2 emissions. So they have to be the answer. And so we were very curious to find out, what does it take to get cities from saying that they care about climate to actually doing something about climate. So we designed a study that's got two parts. The first part was a quantitative study in which we looked at the 169 US cities that signed the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. So all of these cities have indicated by signing the Global Covenant that they care about the environment. And so the question that we had was, what does it take to get these cities to go from saying that they care about the environment to actually doing something about the environment? And then we dug in Additionally, to one particular city, Middletown, Connecticut, both of us are affiliated with Wesleyan University, and that is where Middletown, Connecticut is located, where Wesleyan University is located. And so in that city, we're able to sort of get a little bit more insight into why certain factors matter and how they influence cities, even relatively poor and small cities, to go from just talking about climate to actually doing something. So since many of you in this conference are part of cities that have signed the covenant, I thought I'd give you some overview of what the profile of the US signatories are. As you can see from here, they come from all over the United States. They are very economically diverse. They tend to lean Democratic. So most of the cities, just over 50%, supported Democratic candidates for congressional and presidential elections. Although, as you can also see, a pretty large chunk, a quarter, were mixed, meaning they split their votes. One, they either voted for a Democrat for the president and a Republican congressional members, or they voted for a Republican for president and supported Democratic candidates at the congressional level. Most of the signatory cities have some kind of action plan. But as you can see here, only about a third of them actually have action plans that are ambitious, that require that their cities have net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And that is where we need to be. And so what is it going to take to get all the cities to go from having some kind of action plan or saying that they care about climate to actually having the kind of ambitious plan that we need to see from all of our cities? So it turned out it was not whether or not they're rich or poor. As you can see here, we have a lot of rich cities that have ambitious climate plans, but we also have a lot of poor cities that have ambitious climate plans. So it was not the level of income in the city. And in fact, we tested a number of different factors, and most of the ones that we thought would matter turned out not to matter statistically when we were testing it on these 169 cities. Population didn't matter. We thought maybe larger cities would be more likely to have ambitious plan. As you saw earlier, the per capita income didn't matter. State incentives. So we thought maybe cities that were located in states that had strong incentive programs to develop clean energy, that they would be more likely. That turned out not to be true. Similarly, we thought cities that were part of international climate networks, particularly ICLEI, which has sort of blueprints for ambitious plans, we thought those cities might be more likely. That turned out not to be true. And similarly, we thought Democratic leaning partisanship might influence things, and that turned out not to matter. It turned out that only two things had a statistical influence in whether or not cities had more ambitious plans. And the first one was full-time paid city staff dedicated to climate energy policy. And the second thing was whether or not the city had a university. As you can see from the graphs here, if your city had full-time paid staff that helped develop environmental and energy policy, it was much more likely to have a plan and also much more likely to have an ambitious plan. And similarly, cities that also had universities in their located in their city were much more likely to have plans and much more likely to have ambitious plans. I'm going to turn over to my colleague Sonia so that she can talk a little bit more about the case of Middletown, Connecticut, to help explain why these two factors matter.
Yeah, thank you. So kind of what we said before, we like this one case study is going to focus on the city of Middletown, Connecticut, largely because in August of 2019, Middletown passed an energy plan that outlined a means of transitioning to an entirely renewable city within 30 years by 2050. And both of us were super intrigued by this plan because we are completely aware, as you all are, that a total renewable shift in only 30 years is by no means an easy feat. But especially for Middletown, which is a small city, like what was said before, with roughly 45,000 people, and 12% of those people live below the poverty line. So this entire study was like largely birthed out of this curiosity, which was fueled by the existence of this very plan. But our curiosity extended beyond the logistics of the plan and kind of focused on that the plan was derived in Middletown. We wanted to understand how and why a city like Middletown, with limited resources, population, and finances, could implement and create an ambitious plan that, where in the face of climate action, it was lacking on a state, national, and global level. At the time of this plan in August 2019, Middletown's plan was even more ambitious than the state of Connecticut's, which is widely recognized as one of the most environmentally progressive states. Just more background on Middletown. Like we said before, it's a college city. It's largely residential, and it's known for Wesleyan University. And Wesleyan University is a private university founded in 1831 with approximately 2,800 full-time undergrad students. So our research included so many cities and extended far beyond just Middletown. But we returned to Middletown because it's a useful city to study on an individual level. It's a university city, it's small, and it's one of the 19,000 American cities with populations under 100,000 people. And also, like we said before, it's a really strong example of a city voluntarily crafting a plan that far exceeds the standards put in place at the state, nationwide, and global levels. So we hope that by studying the creation of this plan within Middletown, we're able to answer the questions that came up in this data, which was that why does a paid full-time energy coordinator and or why does the presence of a university influence ambitious climate plans? So diving into Middletown and their kind of like history in creating this plan, we see that although the city talked a lot about climate and said they cared about climate, there was no actual action until 2005. And in 2005, there seemed to be action because Connecticut created a state program to promote clean and renewable energy. And this program spurred action within the city. Middletown pledged to generate 20% of their electricity by renewable energy by 2010. And Wesleyan committed to aiding them in the goal. The city also formed a completely volunteer-based clean energy task force to help reach the target goal, and the task force still exists today. So there was some things that were occurring between like 2005 and 2010, but largely in 2010, Middletown reached their target, and they were looking for something else to work on. And during this time, while they were looking for something to work on, Middletown also implemented a full-time paid energy coordinator, and it's fulfilled and still currently held by the same person, which is Michael Harris. And ever since there was this implementation of Michael Harris's position, we see a steady progression towards a plan. So in 2017 and 2019, Connecticut launched Sustainable Connecticut, which is a program to recognize and support thriving Connecticut municipalities and like aid others in becoming more resilient and clean. So everyone that we talked to on the task force noted that this program was the boost that they needed in order to get moving, as it offered a tangible way to begin to accomplish resilience within the city. So we again see the powerful influence that the statewide programs have on like inciting action within individual cities. So after they achieved bronze certification, the task force and Michael Harris, the energy coordinator, came together to develop the current energy plan. And in some ways, the plan was implemented in order to achieve Sustainable CT Silver certification, but it's also exceeded the guidelines of the certification, and it went above and beyond. So largely because of the ambitious vision, the contents of the plan are largely attributed to Michael Harris himself. So then in 2019, Middletown's energy plan was officially implemented with an ultimate goal of creating a 100% renewable energy city. So it's overwhelmingly clear that the creation of the plan would have been impossible without the position of the energy coordinator. Although the plan was technically co-written by the task force and the energy coordinator, interviews with current and former members of the task force emphasized that Michael Harris was the true architect behind the document. They often refer to him as the plan as his brainchild. Since he's the only full-time staff member in Middletown's Energy and Sustainability Department. He's an expert on Middletown's energy usage, and he's best equipped to create a plan that directly addresses a total renewable shift in the city. Most obvious, however, and most important to note, is that the unpaid volunteers of the task force did not have the capacity to take on a task as immense as creating an energy plan that focused on creating a total renewable shift. Everyone in the task force has a full-time job, and Middletown's process of like implementing an energy coordinator underscores the important role of having a dedicated staff person who can commit himself to seeing the plan development through to its conclusion as a part of their regular job and not just during their free time. In fact, after talking to both Michael Harris and the Clean Energy Task Force in general, they all noted that they strongly believe that if Middletown extended the paid positions for within the Energy and Sustainability Department to someone that can focus on sustainability, he can work hand in hand, and it would be really, really powerful for the city. And then this case study also emphasized how important having a university is in creating an ambitious plan. So through going through the creation of the plan, we see that they're both formal and informal collaborations within Middletown and Wesleyan. So the formal collaborations can be seen by the fact that within the Clean Energy Task Force ordinance, it's required that one member has to be from Wesleyan. And this requirement demonstrates that the city is dedicated to including the university's opinion in regards to energy action. We also see that there's a few formal financial collaborations. Notably, this can be seen when Wesleyan purchased 1 gigawatt of clean energy annually to support Middletown in reaching their first energy goal. And it's important to note that Wesleyan's campus is privately owned land, so Wesleyan did not receive any direct benefits from purchase. The university essentially just purchased clean energy for the municipality. And in a similar vein, Wesleyan established a Sustainable Middletown internship position where student interns are paid to do crucial work within Middletown. They work with the energy coordinator and kind of focuses on the stuff he doesn't have the time or capacity to cover. And this is a paid position, but the university pays the student salary. So both of these formal financial collaborations kind of suggest or point to that perhaps the financial resources of the university can compensate for the lack of Middletown's. It's also important to note that the progressive nature of a college campus will result in more protests and demands that could possibly influence city policy makers to focus on more climate progressive policies. So we see this when the students pressured the current Middletown mayor to sign a no money from fossil fuel pledge. And it's quite common for courses within the university to support climate action research for the city. And for the university to hold meetings with the city to present what they are doing on campus for energy efficiency. So given this information, we can kind of infer that Wesleyan's knowledge and mentorship is readily available. It is easier for a municipality to access and implement this information than within a municipality that doesn't have a university, and they have to spend their own time, funds, and brain power to produce similar proof of information. So we can kind of suggest from this that perhaps the nature of simply having Wesleyan to rely on as a source leads to the creation of a more ambitious climate plan than if Middletown did not have a Wesleyan to rely on. What was also really interesting in the research, which I didn't think was going to happen, is kind of the less official but still obvious connections between those with crucial roles within the municipality and the university. So most notably, the chair of the Clean Energy Task Force is Jennifer Kleinvance, who is also the university's director of sustainability. And the chair of the task force is largely responsible for advising the mayor and the common council and communicating with the energy coordinator. But since she's also the sustainable coordinator of Wesleyan, Jen is very involved in the creation and implementation of the university's sustainability and climate plans. And although she's very quick to note that she wears different hats in each of her positions, it's really important that the same person who has the most influence over the university's climate policy also has significant influence on the city. We see this phenomena again when Middletown passed their 2020 climate energy resolution. And the resolution was written by 3 Middletown residents, and all 3 of them are connected to Wesleyan University in some capacity. And this is not something that just occurred or like a random occurrence. Individuals who work for the university moved to Middletown because of their jobs, but they've extended beyond simply employees. They've become important members to the city community that can impact real change within the city level. And it's no surprise that the members of the Clean Energy Task Force that I interviewed, along with the energy coordinator, Michael Harris, all individually noted that there is something simply about the presence of being in a university city and having a university so close by that positively influences the culture and climate of Middletown in regards to environmental action.
So thanks for your attention. And do we have the last slide? Thanks for your attention. And we'll just close here. As you can see from our findings, it's often easier for cities at all levels, at all incomes, of all sizes, to implement and develop clean energy plans than one might have thought of. We don't just have to become richer or somehow bigger or wealthier or get state incentives that we don't have or change the political orientation of the people in our city. We can hire an energy manager to help focus and organize city actions, and we can leverage educational resources and personnel through informal and formal relationships with universities or indeed with high schools or community colleges that are in our area. So thanks again, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a very interesting presentation. Just to sum it up, I think that basically shows us the importance of having a champion in cities and the importance of partnership and collaboration with universities. And in fact, I think this is being seen across the globe, the importance of the collaboration of cities and the academe in building data and pushing forward for energy transition and more sustainable actions in cities, because that propels commitment across the stakeholders, given evidence and given data and cooperation. Yeah, interesting presentation. So now we will have another presentation from a university by our colleague, Catherine Brinkley. Catherine Brinkley is associate professor from the University of California, Davis. Dr. Brinkley is a city planner who conducts spatial analysis to inform practice. She also has a public health degree in veterinary medicine. Dr. Brinkley research centers around One Health, a concept that considers health shared among humans, animals, and the environment. Her primary research is supported by the National Science Foundation Career Award and seeks to build a scientific understanding of how cities work within their regions. Her research team has built the first state-level searchable database for local general plans. Her work is used internationally by the United Nations Food Agriculture Organization, or UNFAO, as well as local communities to guide plans and policies. To share with us the reading for climate justice across 460 cities and 58 country general plans in California, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Catherine Brinkley. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you so much. All right. Let me get my slide deck up. Today, I'm going to share with you a tool that I hope will be broadly applicable. So as many of you know, land use planning in the US and many other places is a local affair. And because it's local, it means that there's not always that same level of oversight or review of what's in plans. And it can be really difficult to know what various cities are doing. So building off of the previous presentation, innovation in one city often happens because there's inspiration from another city. And so to help cities learn from each other, we've built a search engine across California's over 500 city and county general plans. And these are documents that are hundreds, sometimes thousands of pages in length. They're collaboratively produced that takes communities many years, many city council debates to figure out what they want to put in that plan. And what's in the plans is everything from mountain lion habitat to environmental justice to solar farms. I can guarantee you, if there's something you're interested in, it is in a general plan of a city. I want to start by acknowledging the wonderful team that has helped me build this research. Jenny Wagner is a PhD candidate at UC Davis, and she conducted an analysis across 7 California city plans that had the most environmental justice content and pulled out hundreds of example policies, which I will briefly touch on at the end of the presentation. Lindsay Poirier is an assistant professor at Smith College, and she helped me develop the search engine of plans that I'm going to share with you. Bernadette Austin co-directs the Center for Regional Change with me. This is an applied research center at UC Davis. We partner with nonprofits and local governments on community-based research that centers around environmental justice, housing, and youth. And Carl Stamer, also at UC Davis, helped with the topic analysis, the natural language processing piece of reading across all of the plans using machine learning software. We also have a cohort of wonderful students that have worked on the project. And I want to thank Tiffany Ng from the California Environmental Justice Alliance and Jennifer Ganata from Communities for a Better Environment. They provided feedback across a variety of nonprofit partner agencies that helped us center social equity in building this search engine and also conducting an analysis of environmental justice in California's plans. So with that, let me share with you a little bit about the framework for how planning works in California. The state has a variety of mandates that cities and counties need to meet in drafting their general plans. And the general plans will determine what development is to occur. So for example, housing or commercial, how much, so the density, at what point in time, and the location. General plans will also cover transportation, so where roads and highways go, open space, so planning for parks, conservation, which lands will be preserved for agriculture, for wildlands, noise, safety, hazards and wildfire, and air quality. In addition to that, there's new state mandates that require that plans address environmental justice. And this is the notion that new development should not present undue burdens on low-income communities or communities of color, which had been historically disadvantaged in the planning process, where public funding and infrastructure was denied to their neighborhoods. So this is a shift in acknowledging past disparities in planning, seeking to address them with future plans. And this is an exciting piece of climate justice, I think, as we think about where people will live in the future and how to build healthy, safe, and equitable communities. The goal of the database that I'm going to show you was to help state agencies understand what's in local plans, how are cities and counties meeting these directives to plan for environmental justice, to plan for a changing climate. It was also a tool to help our environmental justice advocates understand which cities are doing the most, which cities are pioneering environmental justice efforts, which cities are pioneering anti-racism efforts in their plans, and then to draw attention to those communities of opportunity, as well as pairing communities with each other for learning. So as we just heard from another city example, that city example may not compare with planning for LA, for example, a large city with many millions of people. So trying to figure out which cities to pair with each other for learning opportunities. And this gets to the local jurisdictions piece. Cities often look to cities of a similar size or in a similar region as they're looking for inspiration for how to address particular topics of concern. And last, for the research community, this search engine is a treasure trove of what's in plans, how cities are conceptualizing both their problems and their future solutions. So we saw a variety of uses. I want to point out that in building this search engine to assemble for this presentation, climate justice aspects, that there's not data infrastructure in planning. And what I mean by that is that not all of these plans, though they are public documents, are in one place. They're not even all on the local jurisdiction website. They're not all in one format, so they're not all in readable PDFs, which is a problem for Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. It's also a problem when we're extracting text and using machine learning to compare text on the plans. And there's often not standard metadata. So plans can be adopted in a particular year and then amended many times after, and those amendment dates are not always included in the plan because the PDF, which is not always a PDF, isn't always time-stamped. So there's a big data infrastructure problem with the way that local planning works. This is what the beta version of our portal looks like. So you can type in any search term that you are interested in. Perhaps you're interested in how communities are planning for members that have disability. Perhaps you're interested in how cities and counties are planning for youth. You could type in youth. If you type in a phrase, you need to put quotes around it, and then you hit search. And this will pull up the search hits. So this is a search hit for the example of environmental justice. So I want to draw your attention to the fact that the state mandated that California cities and counties address environmental justice in 2018. You will notice that many cities and counties have already addressed this topic well before the state mandate to do so. And this is just further testimony to the fact that local jurisdictions are innovating, and they're a wonderful place to look for those particular innovations. The map on the left shows counties in blue, which cover a larger area, and cities in orange. And I want to draw your attention to the spatial variations in this map. So you'll notice that many cities and counties around San Francisco, which is the Bay Area in Northern California, have environmental justice in their plans. And similarly, many cities and counties in Southern California around Los Angeles have also addressed environmental justice in their plans. California is a very diverse state, so you can see there are cities like San Francisco with nearly 1 million people, as well as San Diego on this list with over 1 million people. And then there are many smaller cities and counties like the city of Commerce in LA County that has a population of 12,000 and is one of the cities that has mentioned environmental justice the most. So there's a regional variation here. That regional variation can be due to local culture. It could be due to policy diffusion. It could be due to who's feeling the impacts of climate and particularly the need to innovate around climate justice and environmental justice in particular. Next, you can click on the year that the plan was created here. So you can see Oakland addressed environmental justice already in their 1998 plan, one of the earliest. And if we click on Alhambra, you can pull up the plan itself. And this is really helpful because search terms, especially in plans, are often associated with images. So there could be pictures of the community, pictures of local leaders, but also plans, particularly in California, need to match zoning ordinances. So zoning maps that set out those spatial uses. So being able to see your search term in context is helpful. And here you can see in Alhambra, environmental justice is addressed hand in hand with equity under its own chapter that addresses quality of life. And then you can look further down in the PDF for that particular term and how it's used and pull out policies. So this is an excellent tool for citizen scientists who are doing their own research on how cities and counties are addressing environmental justice. But for researchers, we can then take this and pull out a variety of policies and evaluate them for implementation. So I'm going to show you a few pieces that are useful for the research community as well as for policymakers. The way that California currently assesses how cities and counties are planning to meet a variety of state level objectives is through the annual planning survey. And not every city or county responds to this survey every year. So about 60% of cities responded in 2018. With our database, we can survey what's in plans for almost all of the 500 local jurisdictions in California. And there will be discrepancies. So for example, the annual planning survey noted that about a quarter of California's cities were planning for climate adaptation. However, we found that only 3% of California cities mentioned the term climate adaptation in their plan. And this should be concerning. I also want to note that cities and counties can address climate adaptation without calling it climate adaptation. But when there's not that shared verbiage around a term, it makes you wonder if there's a shared culture around implementing. So you can look up how many cities and counties mention solar, and there will be far more that mention solar farms, wind, for example, on the solution side. Part of environmental justice is acknowledging past disparities that planning has created. And there's a lot of push in urban planning right now for planning to become anti-racist. I want to highlight that only 1 out of the 500 plus California city plans mentions the term racism. So there's far more work to do there in terms of acknowledging health disparities and past planning practices that have brought about those disparities. There's also a need to update plans. So many hazard plans that are in the general plan database are boilerplate. They use the same language from place to place. Only 2 mention the term managed retreat, which is an innovation, but there's a need to rethink how California cities and plans are addressing wildfire, for example, or sea level rise. And we do see evidence of a lot of innovation. So community choice aggregation is a relatively new policy in California, which seeks to transition energy infrastructure to lower greenhouse gas emitting energy supplies. And 18 cities and 11 out of the 58 counties mentioned this term. So you can see this evidence of innovation. It doesn't all fall or fly under the same flag of climate justice or climate adaptation, as we're seeing. So you can search for terms and phrases. That's the general citizen science piece of this. We can also quantify context. So I can ask, how close together does the term climate mitigation co-occur with the term equity? And this is where the research piece comes in, because we can look for clusters of co-occurring words. And in natural language processing, this is called topic modeling, and these would be topics. So here's an example of a cluster of co-occurring words in the California corpus of plans, which would generally refer to air quality. If we're reading across these terms, you'd say, every time these terms are co-occurring in a plan, it's probably because this is the section that is talking about air quality. Carl Stamer and I have a publication that came out this year where we looked at how many topics California cities and counties address in their plans. And it goes well beyond those 9 requirements. There are 60 topics that California cities and plans address, and many of those topics overlap, and there are many different flavors of those topics. So single family housing has its own distinct flavor of terms that surround it versus dense multifamily housing or housing policy that seeks to address the housing crisis and homelessness. And you can identify—
5 minutes, Catherine.
Wonderful. You can identify how well those topics fit each of the plans, which is what Jenny Wagner and I are doing right now, where we've looked at a topic with words that co-occur and highlight environmental justice within California plans. So we pulled out the cities that have the most environmental justice content, and then looked across these 7 plans for how these cities were planning for environmental justice. And we made sure to pick a range of cities from across California, both in terms of population as well in terms of geography. And one thing that I want to highlight is that most of the cities that are majority of color in California were pioneering more of the environmental justice topics within plans. And this is an important distinction as we think about where we need to look for innovation. And those cities that are majority community of color have done a lot of that innovation around environmental justice work. So Jenny Wagner did this piece of the research where she read all of those 7 plans and coded all of the individual policies that pertain to environmental justice within the plans, and was able to pull out over 600 distinct policies. Some of them refer to where to build homeless shelters. Others refer to programs for farm worker housing. There were environmental justice policies that touched on all of the 8 required elements in the general plan, from air quality to housing to transportation. And there was a greater focus on vulnerable places and neighborhoods as opposed to population groups like youth, disabled, elderly. So more focus on place as opposed to the population characteristics. So in closing, what I want to say about California plans is that cities and counties, particularly those that are majority of color, have been pioneering environmental justice policies. There are hundreds of wonderful policies to celebrate, and those policies and the 7 plans that we pulled intersect all areas of planning. So if you're thinking about environmental justice and transportation planning, there are examples. And last, I want to end by inviting you to search across 500 California cities and counties for your favorite topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Indeed, very interesting research, very useful for all stakeholders, I suppose. Quick question: in the database, in the beta version, is there a step further looking at if at all this climate justice policies and programs gets implemented, or how far has it been implemented over the span of the planning period?
I'm so glad you asked. The beta version of this portal was launched this summer, so it's only a few months old. And we have a grant where we will start looking at correlating some of the implementation outcomes with the plan contents. And as you all probably know, there are very few plan evaluation studies, and they often evaluate tens of plans. We also have hopes that with additional funding and partnerships, we can expand this database so that it's not just California plans, but plans in Oregon, plans in Texas, internationally, so we can see how many different local communities are preparing to meet the challenges they face.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm sure our participants on the I4C stage or here in the Zoom would have other questions for you later. But for now, let's proceed with our third presenter, who will talk about the Local Government Climate Emergency Toolkit. So he is Dale Martin. He served as a councillor for the Northwest Ward of Moreland City Council, Victoria, Australia, from 2016 to 2020. He was also a former chair of the Urban Planning Committee and councillor responsible for infrastructure, waste transition, sustainability, and youth. He is a former board member of the Australian Energy Foundation, author of the Local Government Climate Emergency Toolkit, which he will be sharing with us today. So without further ado, Dale, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. Fantastic. Can people see that? Has that come up?
Yes, we can see
fantastic. Alrighty. G'day everyone. My name's Dale Martin. Coming to you from Melbourne. Victoria, Australia. So I'm the author of what I've called the Local Government Climate Emergency Toolkit. So this piece of work was really so I got elected to council in our city, the city of Moreland, back in 2016. City of Moreland is a city of about 180,000 people, just north of Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. And what I had done over the 4-year period as a councillor was really try and collect the most progressive policies to tackle the climate emergency from across the country. And so essentially what this toolkit is almost a policy or an innovation repository of actions that a city can take. And the way that I describe it to people is almost like a green star, a LEED, or a BREEAM for governance for tackling the climate emergency. So the toolkit is available free for anyone. I've put it up there in PDF and in a Word doc as well. You can just download it from the website lgcet.com, and it's free for anyone to use, copy, distribute. Obviously, I want to see these ideas taken up as widely as possible. So again, yeah, myself, so I was elected back in 2016 in sort of an unwinnable seat. I was a community campaigner and activist, particularly on energy and waste. And so I was sort of encouraged to run for city council, and I got elected, surprisingly. And so really I set about, as over the 4 years, really trying to enact as much sort of progressive change in the space that I could. I voted on about 1,300 reports. Of that, I made about 100 amendments, and I also moved about 30 notices of motion. And really the bulk of the work that I was doing was to really set targets in place and to really find ways to measure our progress towards tackling, best practice environmental management, but also in particular really trying to transition us to tackling the climate emergency. Everything that I did on council, it required a lot of negotiation. You can't just pick up a policy from another state and another city and then roll it out straight away. You have to convince the other councillors that it's a good idea, but then you also have to convince the CEO, the executive, and the staff that are working on that area that it's a good idea. So it was quite a bit of effort over the 4-year period, but we got some really great outcomes in the city. Also, my community advocacy, we ran a campaign called Plastic Bag Free Victoria. Essentially, what we were asking for is to ban the free distribution of single-use plastic bags at the checkout. We were successful in that. We created sort of almost a national campaign, and we've seen quite broad action on plastics in particular right across the country as a result of this campaign, but also the campaign sort of joining up. And really the idea of collaborating across cities, across states, even nationally, a lot of the ideas from that process flowed into this work. So really what I wanted to do in sort of putting together this toolkit is there's a couple of sections. One is sort of explaining, well, why local governments should act. Who are the decision makers in a city? Something that I found quite frequently being on council was that people were lobbying either a staff member, they were lobbying the CEO, or they were lobbying councillors, and really there was a lot of wasted energy from the community. And so you're trying to get the community members and upskill them to be really strategic in how they are communicating and how they're lobbying for action within a city. Talking about the key documents, and I know it was sort of the plan was mentioned before. We have it, we call it sort of a council plan or a corporate plan in Australia, and that is, being one of the most influential documents, as well as the annual budgeting process, and trying to educate and upskill people on how to make submissions, how to participate in that process, because then you're able to start getting some of the changes in place. Also, really focusing in on being very specific, measurable actions with suggested timeframes. One of the things that I found when I got on council is we had some really great statements and some really great intentions on climate action and on taking tackling climate, but there was just no way of measuring it, and because we weren't measuring it, a lot of the good intent was sort of falling to the wayside. And my toolkit, it's been downloaded over 4,000 times, and I've delivered about 30 presentations across the country just in the last couple of months. So it's been really successful to date, but I'm really hoping to really amp that up over the next couple of weeks, and also have a new version coming out in a fortnight. So that'll be available on the website. So the need, obviously we're facing a climate and biodiversity emergency. I mean, you can only see what happened in Australia over the last year with just the crazy bushfires, huge devastation, right across the country. We need to act. Unfortunately, at a federal level, we're a bit lackluster at the moment, but the brilliant thing is that there's a lot of states that are taking action, and now local governments are really starting to understand their role and a hugely significant role that they have in tackling climate action. Looking at local governments, I mean, it's tens of billions of dollars across Australia annually are spent. And so in order to, to change trajectory, just influencing what we spend our money on is hugely influential. Councillors, myself as a councillor, I was getting lobbied all the time, hundreds of emails, phone calls. As a councillor, you're very time poor, and so I really wanted a tool to be able to just copy and paste actions that were successful, that were working well in other cities. And so this toolkit provides that for current councillors. Being in governance, you're quite reactive. You do get a lot of, this is happening, you need to immediately do this. And you tend to sort of get in this reactive mindset and not necessarily be as progressive as you might want to be as a city councillor. But the thing that I really learned was that the officers and the executive, they learn quickly from what is working in other cities. And so this is a huge opportunity that you can potentially, pilot programs in some cities, cities that may be more affluent, that might have more discretionary expenditure, that they can pilot those programs, and then other cities can learn from that. And again, it's all about sort of sharing as much information as possible with each other. And of course, the other need for this sort of toolkit was, I mean, the system is incredibly complicated. Australia, we have 3 levels of government, and people trying to work out, well, who's responsible for what. There is a lot of confusion. Our civics isn't the greatest, and so really trying to explain to people, well, what is under the remit of a local government in Australia, and where should I be putting my effort and my attention. So this page here is really just a summary slide of all of the actions / sort of recommendations that we're recommending as part of this toolkit. Each of these actions has sort of a tiered system, so it sort of has a minimum, what we would recommend for a council that's just trying to implement this stuff first up, all the way through to sort of the best practice policy that I have found nationally here. And really what all of this is driving towards is net zero. So for a city to become successfully net zero, you can't just focus on the management, you can't just focus on the comms or the energy. And energy is something that a lot of cities do tend to focus in on, and it's something that I'm confident even internationally that we'll get in, we'll really sort of master the energy net zero sector. But there is still a lot of work to do with the transportation sector, looking at waste and the circular economy, looking at open space, looking at industry, the built environment. There is still a long way to go, even once we move all operations to 100% renewable energy. And so the sectors that are included in the toolkit, I've called sort of the transparent and accountable actions. This is sort of, I describe it as setting the culture within a council. I mean, typically what I've found in my discussions with staff, in my discussions with other city councillors and mayors from across the country, is that you can sort of put as many actions as you want, but if the culture of the executive, the CEO, if they're not wanting to take any of these actions because they're either apathetic or they think that it's a waste of money, you're not really going to create the level of change that you would like to see. And even as a councillor, trying to drive change and trying to bring everyone on the journey with me was challenging. And so there's some certain things that you can introduce into that process, looking at the KPIs of, say, the CEO's management contract, looking at targets, looking at your risk management, looking at the transparency of your meetings. All of these things can contribute to setting a culture of change. And I think it's really important to really try and tackle that as a first step, because then you have a lot less inertia trying to move through the rest of the actions. Talking about communication, we were 10th council in the world to publicly declare a climate emergency. A lot of people ask me the question of is declaring a climate emergency actually meaningful? Do we need to do that? Can't we just go and do all the actions and move on? And for me, the one thing that I've found, and the key thing that I've sort of seen between councils that have declared a climate emergency and others that haven't, is that you do start to get this culture shift where the responsibility of the environment doesn't just sit within the environment team or the environment officer. It actually sits as a responsibility across all divisions and departments within a council. You start to see things like targets being put into executive contracts. You start to see some of these other things flow through when you do go and make that public declaration. And so I think it's a very important thing to do, because it starts to change that culture and that mindset, especially for people who are working on things that might not think that it's relevant to them at all. Talking about energy, and so there's a heap of energy actions. Obviously 100% renewable operations is ideal, but you're looking at things like bulk buy opportunities for residents. Council and local governments can tend to have the resources to go in and run procurement, run negotiation on behalf of residents. People that don't have access or the expertise or the knowledge in certain areas can then actually work with council to get a better deal for themselves. And so there's all these ideas that you can implement as a council that is low cost, but then you can actually multiply your effect across the community. Transport, we had a really big focus on active transport and public transport. So trying to make sure that all of our footpaths and sidewalks were really best practice, looking at separated cycling lanes to make people feel safe, to encourage people to use cycling as a form of transport. Even looking at our fleet policy, looking at what vehicles we were purchasing, how we're purchasing them. There's any number of sort of actions that you can take in that space. Circular economy, again, it's looking at your waste, looking at your source separation, looking at the sharing economy, the benefits of traditional libraries, of seed libraries, of tool libraries. You name it, there can be a library for anything. And then the supply chain emissions reduction that you get from having those within a community is of huge benefit. Looking at the built environment, obviously environmentally sustainable design, making sure our buildings are built for the future is hugely important. And then also looking at our open space, making sure people have access to open space, but also looking at the urban heat island effect, looking at our food system strategies, even looking at the local laws and the catering that we would be getting in a council. And so the toolkit really tries to cover off all of those areas. This is just a quick example of one of the pages. This is the current version. As I said, the new version of the toolkit comes out in 2 weeks. It just talks about the transport actions, the recommended actions, and say, for example, where we would be asking for at least 2% of the council budget or $10 per capita, whichever is higher, to be spent towards pedestrian and cycling infrastructure within the city. As a councillor, having a metric or being able to measure how effective we are or what we're spending our money on compared to other cities is hugely beneficial. And it's something that I chase up for the entire 4 years of being on council. It's something that having that access to that information can really, you can really understand as to whether or not you are progressing on a particular area. I've also included actions. A lot of these actions have actually already been used at various councils where a councillor or a mayor can come along and they can just copy and paste word for word and submit that, and then that will enable the officers to go off and do the work that's required.
Last 5 minutes, Dale.
Thanks. And so then the actions to take, I really do strongly believe if you're able to encourage your local mayor, your local council to publicly declare a climate emergency. As I said, it's what I've seen is it's hugely influential in changing the culture within a council, treating this as a legitimate issue that needs resources, needs funding, needs action, and it needs urgent action, not something that we should kick away down to 2050 or 2060 or 2070. I really recommend grabbing a copy of the toolkit. Like I said, I've got a version in PDF. I've got a version in Word for people to just quite literally copy and paste if you're wanting to do that. And have a look at your local council plan. Look at your city's policies. You know, are there areas there that your city hasn't even contemplated yet? You know, things like procurement policy, things like risk management, you know, things like employee training and education. You know, these areas are incredibly important, but not a lot of cities have started thinking that. Right now, they're still thinking energy, we'll just take energy actions and then the benefits around that. But there are many, many other areas that can be very low cost that a community can implement. And like I said, share it around, copy it, do what you want with it. This toolkit's a resource for everyone to use. And as I said, if you're interested in the second version, it'll be available at the start of November to download from the website directly. And that's it from me. If you want to get in touch, send me an email, info@lgcet.com, or follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dale. Very interesting toolkit. I'm sure it's going to be accessed further by those who are with us today and also those who will be looking for resources to support them in their climate emergency actions. Quick question from my end while I wait for questions to come in from the online group and also from the Zoom participants. Quick question. Does the tool offer some an explanation perhaps on trade-offs? Like if you do this, this is how it's going to impact on a certain sector, but then yeah, if it's really supporting the net zero campaign, how is it outlining that? Or is there a section on that at all?
Yeah, so I mean, understandably, you know, a council or local government has a sort of a set budget that they would spend every year, and you know, typically the thing that I used to hear a lot from some of the more conservative members of the community that was that you shouldn't be focused on any of this. You should only be interested in making sure the roads don't have any cracks in it, or you should be making sure that my bins get picked up. And you know, that was kind of a pretty common sort of thing to hear. But it's really there's nothing in the toolkit that sort of has those sort of flow-on effects, because there's obviously positive externalities that can happen as a result of an action within the toolkit. And a lot of the actions that I've really tried to focus in on have a lot of flow-on positive benefits. You know, if we were to electrify our transport or move to active transport, you have the positive, you know, reduction in air emissions. You know, if you're subsidizing people to put solar on their roofs, you know, that results in a lower energy bill for them. They have more disposable income, and then that money can flow into the local community. So there's a lot of those sort of examples that I haven't really gone into much detail to really elaborate on. But yeah, the push and pull of the budget process is something that you know, is individual to each area, and something that you know, causes quite a bit of debate within any community. But I would argue that, you know, taking a lot of these actions, the benefits outweigh the expenditure.
Interesting. Thank you. Indeed, the co-benefits argument is always something that's useful for decision makers so that they can really create more champions within themselves to support the work. So yes, so we have Tracy raising her hand. So Tracy, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you both. That was, and for the other presenters as well, really, really interesting and really, really valuable. So I have a comment for both Catherine and Dale. So Dale, I am one of your cohort. I'm the Senior Project Manager for Climate Response for Knox City Council, so not too far from Darebin. And we recently, 2 weeks ago, I was able to get our climate response plan adopted, which is a net zero for council by 2030. Thank you, Catherine, and net zero for community by 2040. And we declared a climate emergency at the same time as doing that. But my comment for you, Catherine, was in the development of that plan, it would have been so amazing to have a portal like you've developed where, because obviously a big part of what I was doing in developing that plan was looking at what else is going on in the world, what is best practice, what are other cities and communities doing. And so your portal would have been incredible for that because obviously the work's being done. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, and being able to see something like that would have been incredible. So I really commend you on that work. I'm sure that there are going to be so many people that take that up, so policymakers as well as citizen scientists and so on. And then so thank you for that, for doing all of that work. And Dale, one of the things I have done in the that I'm hoping in our plan will be really useful is actually, and you probably do touch on it, and I have read your toolkit, the previous version. One of the things that I've been able to do and get through fairly quickly, it's the first cab off the rank in the action plan of the climate response plan, is to embed climate change considerations in all council reporting. So now when anyone takes any business case up to council for anything, typically they used to have to talk about the, economic and financial considerations, the environmental and amenity considerations, and social considerations. But now there's going to be a fourth one in there for climate change considerations. So I've got a whole lot of work to do to develop up the resources for council officers to understand, well, what is that? If they're putting in a playground, if they're redoing a bit of road, any policy that they're doing, or a bit of, obviously, especially for community health. So that's going to be a lot of work, but I'm hoping that over time that will really embed that culture change where people automatically have to think, how does this impact the net zero plan? And the plan is adaptation and mitigation too. So it's not just about those energy, as you said, it's about all the adaptation that we need to do as well. So hopefully that will really start to change everybody else's kind of thinking around making sure that they're accounting for that when it comes to it. But both of those presentations really, really useful. And also the first presentation as well around needing to have that dedicated officer within municipalities to actually drive change. So I just wanted to thank you all for your for the work that you've done in the presentations. It was really, really enlightening.
And great work for yourself as well.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Catherine, would you like to respond to what Tracy mentioned, or?
Well, I'll respond to Tracy and Dale and just note that climate emergency, that term, is not a term that's not the mode that California plans have rallied around in addressing climate. And I also want to note, I find that really fascinating. And I have a lot of researchy type questions around building that sense of urgency and why that's necessary and why that's happening in Australia, but not in California, where there is a crisis and emergency. But I also wanted to highlight the first presentation commented on the political divide in the US. And I want to note that California similarly has a political divide. We often think of California as a very liberal state, which it is, but it's also the state that gave the country Reagan and Nixon, and has a very conservative bent in a lot of rural communities as well. And the way that those rural communities address climate change and climate adaptation and climate justice is not they address it, but not using the same terminology at all. So I think being sensitive to and open to those different brands of what we're calling it and how we're all doing it differently is an important piece of moving it forward in every jurisdiction.
Yes, indeed. Very interesting discussion. I'd like to, I mean, in the context of the Innovate for Cities conference, I'd like to focus on your ideas in terms of opportunities and challenges when it comes to planning. What based on the reading that you have done, the research, Catherine and Dale, in terms of the use of tool, what are the emerging challenges that you think cities are still facing and must be addressed now so that they can further move the plans to action? And those actions getting monitored so that they know if adjustments need to be done given the uncertainty that we are facing. But we know that given the new report from the IPCC, it's there and it's going to happen. So how are these tools, these plans helping one move things to implementation? What are those challenges? What are other opportunities? And how can we monitor all these actions so we can adjust fast and, yeah, in the context of climate emergency, really push things forward? Dale first, and then over to you, Catherine. Or maybe Tracy too. Let's make this a group discussion then.
Yeah, well, I think from my perspective, like I said earlier, I mean, being an elected official, I mean, one of the hardest things that you're sort of continually searching for is how effective are we in what we're trying to do? How do we compare to our neighbors? How do we compare to people in different states? And so that was sort of one of the key drivers in creating the toolkit is it's sort of seeking to provide some sort of benchmark or trying to provide some sort of generic kind of standard, be it per capita spend, be it percentage of the budget spend, looking at some of these numbers to actually say, well, are we contributing as much as we could be? Are we contributing as much as our peers? And so I think that really trying to actually get that information and get that information share happening is hugely important, and that's exactly why, I would have loved a tool like Catherine's work to be able to just search rather than have to do it by myself. And then you're also, you're bringing the organization along. You've got the CEO who, the CEO, the executive, the staff of all different sort of political persuasions, of all different ideas and values. And so, it's really an education campaign, it's an information campaign so that everyone actually has the same understanding. And I think there's so many gaps right across the board on, what is good environmental management. And so as much sharing as we can do, and I know the officer level, like Tracy's probably in touch with all the other officers, across all the other councils. That level of information share is fantastic, but is the same level of information share at a CEO, an executive, at a council level happening? Not so much. And so I think it's really about trying to increase that information share, and that will determine, how successful we are into the future in really mitigating this threat.
Thank you, Dale. Catherine, insights?
Well, I'm so glad that the tool we've built is coveted, and I want to note that we made our code available online so that you can build your own tool. And we're also open to partnership, as I said, for expanding the plans that are currently searchable in our database. I think we'd conceptualized it as first the states, but now I'm pleasantly surprised to see that this type of tool is also needed in many other countries globally. I agree with Dale that the data sharing is an issue, and I think from what we've seen with local innovation in California, at least, is that the places that want to innovate are going to go looking for ways to do that and learn from their neighbors and from places that are already innovating. So you have to have that internal will to do it to begin with. And where there's not that will, what's happening in California right now with housing policy, at least, is that the state has allocated each local jurisdiction the amount of housing it needs to build. And housing policy is climate policy, is environmental justice, especially as people are being forced to flee wildfires, are being forced to live very far from where they work because there's not affordable housing. And the problem in California is that local jurisdictions that don't want to build housing are just not doing it, and they are fighting the state on it through court cases. So, and that's the housing policy piece. The apparatus, the legal apparatus to refer non-compliant local jurisdictions for climate policy is not yet there. So there's not that same level of oversight, intention, use of the court. Right now, doing climate justice or environmental justice is very much an up at a ground up level as opposed to a top down.
Yeah. Any insight, Tracy, from your end?
Well, yeah, I definitely agree with Dale in terms of the knowledge around climate and how it feeds out into every element of municipalities' work. I'm probably, maybe talking out of 10 a little bit, but the council officers know generally what they need to do, and we do share, and we have all of our networks where we talk to each other, getting that buy-in from the top down. We if we get councillors who are advocates for us, then we're lucky and we can do the work that we know needs to be done. I am part of a working group that's just begun on climate emergency councils around that internal training on how do we get our councillors and so on up, and the ones who want to go. So our state government has provided some training. DELP, as you'll know, Dale, has provided training, but for councillors to get them across this. But of course, the only ones who attend that, because it's not mandatory, are the ones who are already interested in it, and are the ones that we don't need to be trying to twist the arms of, or at least even to educate how that falls into place. One of the things I will say in response to your question, Catherine, around the climate emergency kind of declaration, it kind of worked backwards with Knox. There was a big community push in 2019 for Knox to declare, for my city to declare a climate emergency. That did not get up. It didn't pass in council. But what they did do was say, well, we recognise that you're all really upset about this, so we will bring forward our climate response planning. And they brought me on to do that. I came from a not-for-profit from the Climate Council, came over to Knox to write the plan for them. And then, interestingly, because obviously I have a background in climate, I wrote a plan that was as strong as, or if not stronger than many climate emergency councils have been allowed to get through council. And then right at the last, as it went for adoption, the councillor who was part of that push back in the day put a little notice of motion on the top saying, and we want to declare a climate emergency, and that got through. So it was like a chicken and egg kind of push on that. Like, the plan didn't change because I had already written it to a level that we were, effectively working for a climate emergency, but we just hadn't used those words because they weren't politically palatable at the first instance. But there was a change of, an election, and a whole new lot of councillors came in, and then all of a sudden it got through. So it's kind of backed it up. So I'm very glad that I was able to work on the plan in that way, because otherwise, if I'd been only able to do a substandard kind of plan and then declare the climate emergency on top, there would have been a whole lot. It wouldn't have backed it up. So the terminology is useful for community pushers to tell councillors that they want them to take this seriously, rather than, I feel, then councils declaring it and then trying to bring their communities along. There's already massive cohorts that do understand. So that's kind of where I think that the terminology has been useful, even though the plan would have been the same whether we declared it or not. I think it tells people that it's taking it seriously. So that's kind of where I just was twigged when you were asking, Catherine, about what that terminology means, whether it's useful or not. And I think that it is in that respect, and to show, to allow the community to have that push.
I agree. I mean, it gives everything a sense of urgency. And I wanted to add just one more piece about
Sure.
planning and why I'm so hopeful. A lot of youth are very concerned about climate. It is very urgent. They will embody the impacts of climate change, and they can be involved in planning in a way that they can't be involved in voting for elected officials or in who runs their school district even, but they can be involved in how their local jurisdiction is shaped and better preparing it for the emergency that they clearly see in front of them.
Yeah, and yeah, if I may add, in terms of similarly to the work that UN Habitat is doing in terms of planning, it is very important that those planning documents really embody the climate justice element, where the youth, those who are most vulnerable, really becomes the focus. So whether there's going to be political change, you would have that document to rally again if there is at all a change that will happen in terms of leadership, and that plan is supposed to bring everybody together, and it's going to be owned, and it should be owned not just by the leaders but by the whole society. Otherwise it's going to be very difficult to move it forward, and therefore the climate emergency term is not just for advocacy, it's for education, it's for moving things forward. It's also helping us set our direction straight and focus on a certain goal. And this has been very exciting, and seeing these tools, this research, this practice getting shared in this platform is enough in inspiration for all, that everybody, each and every one of us, can do something about it, that leaders and local plans matter in addressing our environmental issues, climate issues, and our societal issues. And it's a whole society approach that can bring us all forward together if we can have a good plan that covers all, with concrete actions as presented by Dale, and with specific actors really focusing on it in city as presented by the research from the Wesleyan University. So we have a few minutes to wrap this up. Before I end, last words perhaps from, I don't see anything coming from the chat. So Dale, insights in terms of closing this, inputs to the Innovate for Cities agenda. How can we further encourage cities, even beyond those in Australia, to look at this tool, to really aspire for more transformative action, and encourage more participation perhaps from their private sector partners, from their communities? What's your message there?
See, it's very interesting. I have on my website, I've got like sort of a metric that tells me which region is downloading it, and it's quite funny because I can pinpoint almost exactly where somebody's, you know, at a council meeting or a local government, they've spoken about climate emergency, and then I can go in and I see that I've got Google Hits, and I've got all the downloads on the website from that particular area. And it might happen that I'll get like, there'll be a random city in Wales or something that I've had a heap of action on the website and download. And I think while not everything is called the same thing across the world, you might have different terms, different terminology, you have different budgets, you have different, but the one thing that we can do is that we can share these ideas. And so I just really encourage people to just download my toolkit, use Catherine's work, like just everyone just go and get as much of this information and share with your networks, because something that you might look at an action and you might think, oh yeah, we've got that, we know that, we don't need to worry about that, but that might be new for somebody in your neighboring city. That might be new for somebody on the other side of the country. And so I really do encourage people to not just these tools, but to as many tools as you can gain access to, copy them, share them, and really just get that information flow happening, because that is truly where we're going to get the change happening.
Well said. Thank you very much, Dale. Catherine, in the context of climate justice and leaving no one and no place behind as we move forward addressing our climate issues and achieving our climate goals, how important is planning, and how can we further advance the tool that you have so that we can propel further research and bring these plans to implementation and serve as a monitoring tool perhaps eventually. Last message.
Thank you. We hope that the tool that we've built is a tool that for joy and for celebration. When there's a new climate plan put out there, it lights up the map, everyone goes to it and reads and compares it. And that's really what it's for, so that you can create, your top 10 favorite climate action plans. You can push your own city. And I do want to celebrate my co-panelists by noting that the first presentation talked about strong leadership, and anyone listening can be that strong leader. Dale wasn't born a city council person, worked really hard to get there. Tracy, wasn't born with that climate action plan in her hand. She worked really hard to make it happen. You too can write policies and can pitch them no matter how old you are, no matter what city or county you live in.
Yeah, thank you very much. Champions, data, plans, leaders, and the whole society taking action is going to move us further. So I hope we can further engage. This is a very exciting discussion. This is, I think, an eye-opener to those that there are tools that they can use, and there are databases that they can search to further help them into moving with their local climate action plans. And I hope these are practical examples for them to emulate. And yeah, thank you very much, Dale. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you to the Wesleyan presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you, Maria, for leading us.
Yeah.